We have had a very meaningful two-day event, and we are approaching its end. And now has the time come for us to discuss the start of life. My name is Ilona Keresztes. I am a journalist. I am the editor of uspace.hu. And now I am going to facilitate this roundtable in which we invited various experts from domains associated with the start of life. And the plan is that in the short time that is available to us, as we want to make up for lost time and we want to make sure that you all get back home at the start of dinner, we would like to discuss the importance of fetal life. So let me introduce first Frivaldszky, who is the director of the Human Dignity Center and the president of the Together for Life. Éva Steinbach is the staff member of the Down Under service, and most recently he has been facilitating down adoptions. And of the service, I want to let you know that parents who have or had children with Down syndrome help other parents who have just given birth to such children and who find themselves clueless as to how to continue their lives and how to care for the children. These are trained parents and they work as supervisors as well, so they work in a responsible manner. Dr. Tibor Verebély is a child surgeon who is performing surgery on children as well. And I will interview him concerning the question who really is the doctor of the fetus and how the fetal age and birth can overlap and how we can treat these children. And we will also discuss associated with treatment within the womb. And the next lady is a lawyer and she's also a mother. And she will throw light of these issues from her perspective as an expert as well as a mother. Borbála Tóth-Bognár is a perinatal psychologist following young mothers pre- and post-delivery, also helping them in processing their delivery traumas. Well, there are traumas. It does happen. And the gynecologist and obstetrician, Dr. Tamás Gyula, is dedicated to the concept of delivery with human dignity. And Balázs is a committed pro-life person, and naturally he does not perform abortions. And we will seek his opinion as to what is the attitude of his peers concerning abortion. So let's get started. Let me start with what we have already mentioned in the morning in the course of the discussion involving the young people. Let me start with how we define a child. It is a very ambivalent thing in society. It is fair to argue that the whole world has been unable to deal with this issue adequately. There is no consensus on when childhood begins. Edith and Marty, I think you are the two most competent people on that aspect. Let us know what kind of anomalies you have seen in the world concerning this issue. Yes, thank you. Marty said in the course of today that in the text of the convention there is a definition. So everyone is a child who has not yet reached the age of 18. So individuals below the age of 18. But the biggest debate ensues from the fact that law phrases this issue differently from the way nature has formulated it. Based on ultrasound surveys, we now know that the fetus is a human being. And even in the earliest phase of the life of the human being, that person is already a part of the human family and therefore cannot be involved in any kind of trade. So it's very interesting that in law, it is the legislator who formulates the definition for the human being, and yet in spite of this freedom, the legislators have not been courageous enough to provide the right definition. So that is why we have various definitions from society to society. And indeed, in each society, the systems are different. Marty, before you take to the mic, let me add that I am very intrigued by the way law influences our thinking and the other way around. A lawyer once told me that the good people are expected to follow up the human processes which do take place as a result of people taking action and thinking, and that these processes should be framed into legislation. However, all this is predicated on biological facts. On the other hand, humankind does not pursue some of these fundamentals in their everyday practice, and they try to legislate for these things. So there is a dilemma here. What is your view on it? This is unexpected, but I will try to give you a response. So you are asking me what the role of legislation is. Is it expected to respond to the expectations in society, or is law expected to phrase and enshrine the internal ethical and moral norms? And Edith mentioned something similar. She said that the convention does not define when life begins. It's only in the preamble that mention is made of the need to protect life before birth. And the Holy See attached a certain reservation to this convention because they felt compelled to add that human life begins with conception. Indeed, the international lawmaker, we can fairly rightly argue, failed to be courageous enough to give an adequate definition. But from another perspective, if we adopted that point, we would maybe need to reject the entire Convention on the Rights of Children. So I think it is to celebrate that the convention exists. So that is why we have gathered here. In a way, we are celebrating that convention. It's a good thing that we have these provisions. On the other hand, a national legislator is compelled to review the situation and start thinking about the whole matter again and again. Yeah, I have a simple attitude. Law is a nice thing. It tries to phrase certain phenomena, but biology has already decided for us. Life and childhood, therefore, starts with conception. And this has been enshrined in the Hungarian fundamental law, namely that the fetus has a right to protection from the moment of conception. So, in fact, this is as simple as that. It is the physician's opinion that we just heard, and I am so pleased to hear a physician say this. But I am entirely puzzled by why legislation is not obliged to follow up and to reflect these kind of biological reality in laws. I agree that life starts with conception, and I must tell you a personal experience. When I started my career as a surgeon, the sick mother, the mother of a sick child was there, and we started to examine the child and wanted to find out if the child is sick in any way. And that only started therefore after birth, after delivery, but prenatal diagnosis began. So we realized with the improvement of diagnostical methods that already in the 10th week we are compelled to adopt some kind of an ethical decision. So it is obvious that we have to go as far to the beginning as possible, but law has failed to follow these developments.
And there are different considerations at play. We all have an ethical attitude which is highly individual, but also the law cannot follow this up. I'm sorry to say this. Indeed, it's a value in the fundamental law that we are protecting the life of the fetus. But if we look at Hungarian legal provisions, a fetus only has conditional legal capability. And it's only from the moment of the live birth that we consider the fetus to be legally capable. And obviously, I would separate now the legal provisions from my own ethical conviction, because I agree that life starts with conception, but what I described is the legal reality. And I'd like to add a few more things. In the Hungarian translation of the convention, there is an error, because in Hungarian it says it has an inborn right, while the original says inherent rights. So it's very difficult, actually, in the protection of life, that the translation is wrong, and we hope that that will change in the future. So it's already transpired from the discussion that, from a moral point of view, it's actually not permissible in Hungary to end a life, but legally it is permissible in Hungary. So what do you think, Marta? What about this inherent right that comes from conception? What could be the right Hungarian phrase to describe it? So we could say fundamental, if we have to find the right word. It's actually very difficult, because in the Convention of Children's Rights, this is not the only mistranslation. So maybe it would be a good idea on the 35th anniversary to review.
Mert hogy ezeken a szavakon rengeteg múlik.
So, well, can you say born from the existence? Well, she's saying poor translators, because they are playing with Hungarian words that are impossible to translate, indeed. But I don't think we have to come to a final conclusion on this. Borcsa, you who are focusing on mothers and help mothers process a situation after birth, what about motherhood coming to life? And what about expectancy? So how do you see that? It was in the morning that there was a roundtable discussion, and so a child is a child from the moment their mother considers them to be a child, and it's an existing view. I am in a lucky situation, because the mothers who sought me out, or fathers, represent a layer of society which, if once they invest material sources and money into how pregnancy goes, then from the first moment they see the fetus as a child. And some people contact me because they have a difficulty connecting with the fetus. So they understand that it would be an interesting thing to do. And I am actually just finishing my training on the connection between the mother and the fetus, so I'm also focusing on fetuses via the mother. And in Hungary, it's not as well spread as in Austria, even though it's a Hungarian invention. And when they relax, mothers actually see their child, envisage their child or envision their child in at an older age. And well, I often ask mothers from when they see their fetus to be a child. It's typically from the moment of conception, and sometimes even earlier. And I would like to highlight 3 times also in the context of children's rights that we should be clear on what fetuses are capable of doing, what competencies they have. In the 1990s, And I'm sure my doctor colleagues can confirm this, it wasn't even evident that fetuses can feel pain or children can feel pain. And now we know that the pain receptors are already generated in the brain in the fetus, and with imaging devices we can also monitor a fetus in the week 30. And they have exactly the same responses as a born child. So with the advancement of science, we are beautifully progressing into a direction where it is a given that the fetus is also a human being, and we are not born with a clean slate. Something came to my mind that not many notice, perhaps some mothers notice when they are expectant. When they go for an ultrasound scan, then typically fetuses respond in one or of two different ways. They stay motionless, or they really start moving around. It's the flight or fight response, and fetuses can feel the vibration of the ultrasound from an early stage. And in old ages, children were not given painkillers when certain operations were performed because they thought that children couldn't feel pain. And now we know that fetuses also feel pain. And for a long time, on young children in England, they didn't apply any painkillers because they thought they couldn't feel pain. But now we know that they only respond later to the pain stimulus. And indeed, in England, they performed operations without painkillers, and then there were investigations made afterwards which realized that there was such a shock to these young children from the pain of operation that in itself caused them illness. So, well, I would add to what you said, Borcha, that Andrea is your master, and she wrote down this phenomenon very precisely in her own study, namely that motherhood and the vision of the child or the perception of the child develops very slowly on the side of mothers. First, they don't see the child. First, they only see their own state, even when it's an expected child. And then they realize they are expectant and hold the positive test in their hands. There can be a first fright from this normative crisis, and then the first reaction can be to turn inside, and they will only see the child as a later stage. And we realize this when we help pregnant mothers in crisis. This is what fear causes. Well, I think the building and the atmosphere also allows me to bring in an example about Mary. When she found out she was expectant, she was not only upset in her soul, but she was also confused. So my message to mothers is that it's a totally healthy and normal feeling that when we find out that there is a new life coming into our lives, we get confused. And then we try and find balance somehow. It's a normal reaction, a normal feeling. And if we follow the example of Mary, she was also in this state of mind. And I very much like this example because the Virgin Mary is the most known crisis pregnant mother of the world, who was an unmarried mother who had to escape and didn't have a home and was adopted by his father. So the young Jesus went through and perceived everything that we can go through in life. So he took on not the brightest life, but the most exposed life. And sometimes we see that when a pregnant mother cannot take on the child, they cannot handle the pregnancy, then the typical reaction is not to recognize or acknowledge the child. And when there is news of a sick child or sick fetus, then it's an escape option to consider that the fetus is not even a human being. So it varies as to from what age or what stage mothers see the fetus as a human being, because if it's an expected pregnancy and wanted pregnancy, then they see the fetus as a child from the first moment. But if they find that there is some kind of problem with the pregnancy, so it's a sick fetus or a fetus with a disability, those changes can change dramatically, even when it was a wanted child. And their situation is not made easier by the way the issue is communicated by health staff. Because in my experience, when such a diagnosis is found, and I am in contact with a lot of such pregnant mothers, they were all only offered abortion as the only alternative option, and they never discussed any alternative solutions. And it's a very tough situation when a doctor sits on the other side of the desk, looks at the terminal, and the doctor says, unfortunately, I have very bad news. Because actually the baby has Down syndrome, and in the same sentence he looks behind his back and says to the assistant, Gizushka, please give an appointment to this lady for an abortion for the day after tomorrow. So in this situation, the parent is in such a crisis situation. It's a very sad situation that they are not even given an alternative. So the doctor in the same sentence makes an order about the future of the child. And in this situation, the pregnant mother might be pushed in a situation that they might regret later. So we should at least get to a point where pregnant mothers are told about the alternatives and can get assistance if they wish. And if such a mother turns to me, I will never talk her into giving birth to a child with Down syndrome, but I explain the possibilities and options, and I give them a choice to show them that this is not the end of the road. There are other people living with children with Down syndrome, and if they make the decision to keep the child, or whichever decision they make, they can then live with that decision. Because of course one wrong decision is the uninformed decision made in the lack of appropriate information. As a doctor, I'd like to ask you how such news should be communicated. In prenatal diagnostics, there are illnesses that are not compatible with life, and there is no question. There are illnesses that can be 100% cured with therapy or intervention. They don't pose an issue to medical ethics. But there is a gray zone. Illnesses like Downs that impose a long-term health issue, or maybe a developmental issue of an organ, which even with medical treatment will reduce the child's ability to fit in socially, and then ethical issues are raised. In such situations, talking to the parents is extremely important. And the person who tries to provide information to the parents behaves in a very responsible way. And I'd like to mention three things, the diagnosis and the prognosis. So first of all, the illness must be understood, or the condition must be understood, it must be recognized, and the prognosis must also be known. It's only with these three factors in mind that we should talk to the parents. And the paternalistic attitude, where I immediately say what I think, or they should abort the child, is absolutely forbidden today. It's really not permissible. We must do it in an empathetic way, with the participation and involvement of several people. We call it prenatal consultation, where the prenatologist or even maybe the adult doctor will also talk to the parents, who will monitor the born child during their lives, and they need to discuss the prognosis in depth. And ultimately, of course, the decision goes to the parents, but we need to inform the parents in a very thorough and empathetic way. That was the optimistic version scenario, I believe. That's how it should be. And I can imagine that perhaps it happens in a similar way in the later stages of the pregnancy. And But the majority of pregnancies are terminated at an early stage, not in late stages, when the fetal checks are completed pretty much. Well, they are pretty much completed at week 11 to 14, but the overwhelming majority of conditions can be found by the week 20. And then the mother is put on a conveyor belt, so to say, and simply she is informed to where to go for an abortion. And now I need to step back as a lawyer and say that it's the sickness of the system itself that doctors speak in a way that they do, because if ultimately the child is born and the parents decide that it's more hassle than they can manage, they cannot go to work, they don't have the social or financial or whatever support, and they should fit a lift in their home that they cannot afford, then they go back and say the healthcare didn't help me, they didn't tell me, they didn't notice, and then the healthcare system must pay up. So those in diagnostics carry a kind of moral and spiritual burden. At the moment, we are not yet at a stage where the doctor's own house would be taken away to pay off the parent. It's the Hungarian state that pays, but we are not potentially far from it. Perhaps we should set up a foundation to compensate in situations where we say nobody made a mistake, we couldn't find this condition because it's impossible to find, and the child struggles with several issues, and it's an extra burden for the family because indeed the mother cannot go to work. So the monthly sum of 20, 50, 100,000 forints that the Hungarian state pays is not sufficient. It costs a lot more, and I'm bringing in the lawyers because these situations end up in lawsuits, and the healthcare wants to avoid such lawsuits, and that's why they put the mothers in an automatic kind of procedure. So let's ask the lawyers, if someone was going to launch a lawsuit for not giving birth to the child when the condition is something they could have lived with. And of course, such situations don't really exist, but there was a mother once to whom I said, maybe we should take on such a lawsuit at some point. And what I wanted to say to the professor was that when it comes to conditions incompatible with life, I even then have some doubts.
In fact, I think that as a mother, it had been easier for me to adopt such a decision when the illness was irreconcilable, incompatible with life. However, my brother is bringing up a daughter who has a heart disorder, and she was examined at the heart center, and the surgeon said that this is inoperable, and her life will not last longer than half a year. And her condition was not noticed, and she was immediately put into an institution after her birth because her mother was reluctant to start raising the child. And a social worker contacted me and said, well, there is a child here for adoption, and there would have been someone happy to adopt her. But when the condition was communicated, then the adoptive parent walked back, and my brother's family decided to bring up the child, maybe for half a year. Now the child is more than 7 years old, and her condition is still very unstable. Indeed, cardiologists have concluded that her condition is incompatible with life. She will probably not live to see adulthood. But she is having a happy life, and she is not transferred from hospital to hospital. She is a happy young lady. So it really makes me think how we define a condition that is incompatible with life. From a physician's perspective, yes, but I think life exceeds some of these expectations. And there are situations when, well, there are miracles. Before you would misinterpret my words, there are illnesses which are incompatible with life, like a child, a baby missing a kidney, missing a head. Absolutely, incompatible with life. But on the other hand, I agree that whatever was incompatible with life 25 years ago may not be the same today. For example, a tube missing in someone's throat was such an inoperable condition 25 years ago, but today it is operable, and when this tube is replaced, the person's life can be 100% all right. So even today there may be conditions classified as inoperable, and it may prove to be operable 25 years from now. So this is what I call the gray zone. I wanted to join exactly this topic because I am missing something, gravely missing something. In the Western world, west of Hungary, there are some countries where there is a very significant, extensive perinatal and prenatal hospice system. In the best case scenarios, we are talking of families, maybe only of a mother or a father, and these people may be confronted with a situation which involves an inoperable, incompatible condition. But the person may decide that even if my baby's life will only last for 6 months, I want to have my baby, and I will give my baby the chance to live 6 months. And I want to refer to the Bible. The Virgin Mary did receive positive confirmation from up and above, and Joseph likewise. And here I have to throw light on the role of the father. Maybe biologically he was not the father, but he was the supportive system, and he needed that support because he got frightened as well. Importantly, the father must be also there. And let me direct your attention to the supportive system, which needs reform. It should give a lot more option to parents on the basis of a lot more information. So it's not only like, you know, in your example, there was something written to a doctor. Yes, Edith, we will start discussing the legal aspect soon. But before that, Borcha, I want to tell you that when it comes to processing losses, is that what you were driving at yet? I wanted to say whether there is an intention to kill a human life or there is no intention to kill a human life. So it is absolutely different to process a situation when miscarriage happened or when there was an intention to kill the baby, the fetus. The perinatal hospice is a huge thing. I think it is a practice to be transposed to Hungary, but let's hope that it will happen. And now over to the lawyer. Thank you. I will start from afar and point out that I am not in a position to give you an answer to compensation issues. Neither do I wish to do so. I am wearing the lenses of child law. So, of course, we will never be able to avoid such situations. The liability to pay compensation is an institution established under Roman law first. And Borcha said, on the other hand, that we need systemic answers. And for that to happen, we need interdisciplinary dialogue, like this conference, like this roundtable. These are good steps in the right direction. And we are hearing what you have said. I'm addressing this to the surgeon here. And there are much better lawyers here, better on compensation liability. But I think the point is for each and every one of us to hear the message of our peers and to be aware of, familiar with the legal system in which we operate. Thank you very much. Now I want to shift the focus of our discussions, although in fact what I will point to is something that appears to be far-fetched or far detached from here, but in fact this is very closely connected. We mentioned perinatal hospice services. A condition might trigger the mother to conclude that it cannot be a meaningful life. And this is euthanasia committed in the womb. because somebody's life is interrupted or discontinued or terminated because his or her life is seen as meaningless. And Daniel Korsai's case has given rise to huge disputes in Hungary, and it was the day before yesterday that his case was heard in the European Court. He is seeking lawful euthanasia, and there are many issues here. Among other things, his desire for death can only be realized if another person is involved. And there has been precedents for this in the case of abortions, when doctors are expected to kill the life of either an ill or a perfectly healthy baby fetus, because the mother sees the fetus as meaningless. And this is a very painful point in the work of gynecologists. Balázs, you do not perform abortions, but how do you see the situation in your profession? Yes, I have been lucky because I was never forced to perform such surgeries, but I could quote heads of department in hospitals arguing that you can only be an obstetrician if you have already performed abortions. There is no legal rule that says this, but there are some professionals who think that way. And what I can tell you is that in Hungary we do not have abortion clinics, which is good news. In the absence of a better alternative, these interventions are performed in state hospitals. Under the law, each and every state or local municipality hospital is obliged to have a team capable of performing abortions. For more than that, it is not obligatory. My son studies medicine, and before he was admitted to university, he worked in surgery care as an assistant, and one of the nurses there asked him what his attitude was to such abortions, and he said he does not wish to participate in these interventions, and never was he forced to do that. I fundamentally disagree with abortions, but I also add that if we were to fully ban abortions, in all likelihood, criminal abortions would skyrocket. So this means illegally performed abortions performed under inappropriate circumstances, and that would result in the loss of the lives of mothers. Recently, there was a similar discussion somewhere else, where a woman doctor who moved here from Transylvania related the story that under Ceausescu, when there was such a ban, no week has passed by without a mother emerging at their hospital or at their clinic who, in a worst-case scenario, even died as a result of the abortion intervention. Ethically speaking, my opinion is straightforward. Abortion is a bad thing. On the other hand, you can also drive into the red traffic light. Yes, mothers' fatality. I don't have statistics with me, so whether mothers die in illegal abortion surgeries, it's a very valid question. However, the mortality of women is higher in countries where abortion is legal. So it's not up to that. So it's not a percentage rate, it is a quantity. So where there are many abortions performed, then of course the number is higher. It also depends on the culture, whether you see the fetus as a human being or whether you don't. I agree with that, but 1953 was the year when abortion was allowed. 3 years later, we had more abortions than live births, and that situation has continued until 1974. In 1974, the trend changed, and unfortunately, birth rates have declined, but abortion rates have also declined, and this may have had several reasons, including education. So I want to make this point: banning is not the right way forward. Education, however, is. But I must go further. This education education should start in kindergarten. So the system should support a good psychosocial development. This is what could result in fewer abortions.
So the sensitivity and complexity of this issue is very high, and I was talking yesterday to a specialist about how carefully we need to act, who has an exact picture of the situation, and we know that in Poland the regulation says that an abortion can only be performed if either the life of the mother is at stake, at risk, or if the mother became pregnant through rape. And the specialist said that that is truly reflected in demographics, because mothers are too scared to get pregnant because they believe, okay, what if the doctor wouldn't terminate the pregnancy if my life is at stake? So it also induces a strong internal fear, and that's why we need to give systematic answers, because if it's only law that provides an answer and we throw around the ball to each other, we will never have humane, child-focused, fetus-focused, and mother-focused answers. So there are many players at play here, and the entirety of society also has some responsibility in this. I just wanted to make the point it's a very complex issue. Well, the Polish example can only be the result of bad communication. Such situation cannot happen. I don't do terminations, but if the mother's life is at risk, I would do it. And it's most likely not a pregnancy within the womb, and we actually had to terminate pregnancies outside the womb, and I did such interventions as well, because if we wait another day or two, then the mother's life will be at stake. It's not an ethical issue for me either, maybe just a result of poor communications in Poland. Okay, when it comes to education, I'd like to make a strong point here. I think Hungary is in Hungary, the sexual education is in big trouble, because for understandable reasons, there was a limitation imposed on who can perform sexual education in educational institutions, which says that if someone gets onto a certain list, a list that has not been published for the past year and a half, and actually before I came to the perinatal area, where I was brought by the birth of my first son, I was working in education as a psychologist. I, for example, personally would like to very much focus on sexual education, because it does make a difference when you start talking to children in kindergarten, that children are actually developing in the stomach or tummy of their mothers, and it's a living creature, and then we can start shaping their attitudes. And even adolescents, we know that children start having an active sexual life earlier and earlier, so they should be clear on the consequences of their actions, what might happen and how. When I was a teenager, we had the film Juno, which I think really shaped the whole generation when it came to certain decisions. And to this day, I remember this scene when someone tells the mother the fetus already has nails, or like the skills of the fetus. At 17 weeks, the fetus will actually hear the mother singing and even remember the song, remember the tunes. So it's this kind of information that should be conveyed very fast, because there are indeed some cases when the woman is facing a very difficult decision and she either has appropriate information or not, but she needs to terminate a life, and she knows she has terminated a life, and then they'll need to live with this burden. But sometimes some women don't know what they are doing because they are undereducated. They don't have sufficient information. So it could be make a huge difference, and I don't think it's necessarily a legal issue, but it's a responsibility of our society, especially because we know that in a crisis situation, the mental capacities get limited, and pregnant mothers cannot take on any more information. They have this flight reaction. They want to escape from this situation. And that's that's why it's important, as you say, Borcha, that it would be very important to deliver that information from a very young age in a positive and nice format, so that they look for solutions to life rather than to terminating life. And when it comes to resolving a crisis, and when it comes to the outcome of an unwanted or problematic pregnancy, we must keep the best interest of the child in mind if we are sitting at a child's rights conference, which means that a child must, in all circumstances, be regarded to be a child. And it's an important question because the issue of children conceived in rape came up. In Poland, actually, where the regulation is most strict, a child, the pregnancy born from rape can be terminated, which practically means that the child pays with his or her life for the sins of the father. And I am saying to Hungarian participants that our association has a YouTube channel. It's called Egy Élet, One Life. And we had the latest episode where Sári Pontifex actually made an interview with a lady who was born of rape. And she was born and she grew up. That was the mother's decision, because despite the fact that she was born of rape, her mother regarded the child to be a child and the rapist a rapist, and she didn't confuse the two. So it wasn't the child who attacked the mother, it was the rapist who attacked the mother, and from this act a child was conceived. And when such a child is born and grows up, and when a mother takes on this choice, they then have the right answer to the question as to what life someone who was born of rape can have. And you can actually, it was an interview shot in English, I just realized, so it's not only for Hungarians. The title of the channel is Egy Élet, One Life. It's a very important interview because it highlights and gives answers to a very rare case scenario. It's also very important to add that perhaps as a private individual I fully agree with that, but I also know that such a case is even more complex, because if you think about the fact, well, I don't know whether there is any bigger trauma than to become the victim of rape. When someone penetrates their body and they leave something there physically, and then if they stay pregnant after it, and if the person is not isolated, well, then they could still take an after-event tablet to deal with the problem earlier, but that's a different issue. But the trauma continues because they stay pregnant. And this is where the partners come in, because psychoeducation, because we also need to talk about guys who are the potential rapists, and then the women would need a high level of support to carry through with such a pregnancy, which I am not sure would be available in Hungary to a high number of people. There is no question that such a supportive environment should be available, but if we consider the fetus to be a human being from conception, then we cannot give up this principle, because a child is a child, whether he is conceived of from rape, or love, or whatever other circumstances, and even if the father rapes the mother within marriage, they are still a child, and we need to find a solution to this issue at a social level which ensures that the child can live. So it's very important to allow this woman to process this trauma, and we need to make sure we don't push her from a social aspect in a direction that she wouldn't go to if she had this helpful environment that would help her process this case. So I believe the narrative of society pushes women in a single and only one direction. I wanted to comment on your point, Ilona, about the interest of the fetus. And I often see that when they terminate pregnancies, parents of a child with Downs, they say that they don't want to commit the fetus to this suffering. Even doctors say that it's a kind of suffering, this condition. And I have actually known quite a high number of people with Downs. I think if you have to compare them to the general population, they are typically happier than the average population. They have a higher proportion of happy people than the average population. This is what I see when I walk the streets. And the second point is that we cannot judge. Because, well, I don't have Downs, so it's difficult for me to judge how people can live with mental disability. The only thing I can do is to look around and see how people are. I cannot see myself as blind or imagine being blind, but I actually had an acquaintance with a visual disability, and when after the birth of the child, and they realized that the child also had sight impairment, and she was asked whether she wanted to leave the child in the hospital. And I really don't understand, because the lady fully knew that she had the kind of visual impairment that could be inherited, so she was kind of half expecting this. So let's not want to decide for someone else whether they would be happy with this condition or not. And of course, their parents will have a harder job bringing them up. But in such situations where, parents have, like, so to say, regular children and then non-affected children and then children who have Downs, often say that the child with the Downs is not the most problematic child. So even if they have a sick child, they don't necessarily have the most issues with that child. This is where we could actually fill the legal gap. So what does a fetus have a right to? They have a right to their mother being in a social environment that guarantees the fullest possible life to the fetus and the mother, and that provides at the same time all the resources and support to avoid crisis situations. And I think it's a very pink image for the future, but when we talk about what a fetus should have a right to, well, to exist in the tummy of his or her mother in the most supporting environment. And then we wouldn't have to seek answers to issues that we expect lawyers to answer. Well, I think the answer is already there, because the fetus is entitled to protection before and after birth. So they are also protected by the state before birth within the womb, but of course we still need to add further details. In the Életért for Life Association, we agree that information is worth lives. So I agree that information and education is very important. So 10 years ago, we created a youth community. Youth in the Service of Life is the name of the community, where we continually train newer and newer youngsters to help them understand how life is created and how it can be protected. We have a sister organization, Students for Life, set up by Christian Hawkins. It's a very strong pro-life advocacy body, and it's Christian Hawkins who says that when in a crisis we recommend to a pregnant mother to get rid of the fetus because that will resolve the crisis, and that's also true for babies conceived of rape, then first we are saying that the mother is not capable of coming out of the crisis in a positive way, she is not capable of giving life, and then we also don't resolve the crisis because the crisis stays, but they also lose a child, which adds an even bigger trauma to an existing trauma. So we are adding an even bigger issue on a trauma. So to recommend abortion as a human solution is the biggest letdown, according to Tristan Hawkins. I fully agree with that. I know not everything is resolved globally or in Hungary, and I really wish for a world where we look for solutions in a way where we help the mother and the child to live. Thank you very much for the opportunity to bring this roundtable discussion together, and to you, Márta, for making it possible at this fantastic conference. And I thank you very much for staying and listening to our conversation in such high numbers on the last day of the conference about the first day of the child. Thank you.